Hi, I'm David, I'm the Chief Sub-Editor.
Hi, I'm Noah, I'm the editor.
And this is the first video of the year for the Berkeley Squares Bite, where we take a look at interesting people in and around Bristol.
Today we interviewed Mr. Heathcote, celebrating his 100 days of being headmaster of QEH.
We hope you enjoy.
There just appears to be quite a few Bibles.
Yeah, well, they're not mine, I have to say. They're all Mr. Holloway's, all from his time, yeah.
Do you know if he was Mr. Well, obviously, because he delivered every assembly as a sermon.
Yeah.
Was he that religious? Mr.
Yeah, he is.
Well, he is.
Methodist. I think he might even be trained
Oh, wow.
Methodist priest, I think. Don't quote me on that, partly place. No, but that was that was really important to him. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mr. Heathcote claimed.
Do you think religion's going to be as important to you as a head, or?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? I think things are. I think religion is important to me. I think that's important, and I think having a spiritual side to yourself is really important. I went to a very Christian school. I was at Monckton Combe School in Bath, which is, has a very Christian ethos.
Yeah.
I mean, QEH has a very Christian ethos and background behind it. I think I'm very conscious at the moment that, we are such a broad church in all manner of using that, manner of ways of using that term. So, we have people of all religions and none, and I think it's really important they all feel very welcome here. And so, although we have our Christian ethos, and that's really important to the school, I think we have to understand that not everyone in your audience will be, closing their eyes and praying as you are if you're doing Christian prayer, or, I think it's very important to acknowledge all the religions in the room, including none. So it's an interesting question. We haven't really had to address it yet, really, because we haven't been able to have the famed whole school assembly at this point. And we have appointed our new school chaplain. I think he's really important, but I think he's really good because he understands that. He knows not everyone here is a practicing Christian, and so, but I think he sees his role as much broader than that. And just encouraging, as I said, encouraging spirituality, which I think is really important.
Do you think that you will oversee as a head, because you will probably be here for a number of years?
Yeah.
Do you think you will oversee a sort of secularisation of the school, not necessarily of your own division?
Well, I don't think secularisation. No, I think we need to think about how we're going to, how we can deliver that spirituality and religious awareness in a modern community, which is what this is. And I think we can't expect everyone to come in and worship as if they are a Christian. In the past, 80-90% of the school's community might well have been practicing Christians going to church every day, and that clearly is very different nowadays. So I think it's going to be interesting when we are able to gather in bigger groups than just a year group. Say we gather as a upper school, say we split assembly into two sections and have a sort of junior assembly and a senior assembly. Are we going to still sing hymns every day? I don't know. I wonder if those days unfortunately might have gone. Just because we don't do it enough. And I think there's something very special about community singing. I think that's really important. So I think we could definitely do an awful lot. We could do that, and that's a fantastic thing for everyone to do. It really has that effect of pulling a community together. It's one thing that everyone can at least have a go at and can do all together. Whether that is a hymn, and perhaps it will sometimes be a hymn from a Christian hymn book, but it could be a spiritual song from all sorts of different areas. So I think it's more about the coming together and sort of common thought and a common message that everyone can sign up to. I think that's important.
So how have you found your first 100 days as head of QEH?
Yeah, so it's been just incredible, and it's been. I think I've said a few things. When I got the job first, and I agreed to start in April, I kind of had visions of wandering around the cricket boundary rope, shaking hands with a few parents, having a lovely summer term, just kind of getting into the swing of things really. And the reality was not that at all, obviously. But I think it was just so much more fulfilling and so much more exciting than that, really. In many ways it's been a really challenging time, really intense. But I think I've really seen the school at its best, and I think that some of those best qualities of QEH have come out during these challenging times, and they often say that happens, don't they? I think just the way in which all members of the community, the staff, completely embraced this whole idea of virtual school. I think that was just incredible. They had to upskill so much. I'm sure you can imagine some of your teachers were better at that, or more keen to upskill digitally than others. And I'm sure you've been taught by some of them. But no matter where they were on that digital spectrum of ability, they all, threw their all into it and, upskilled so quickly so we could deliver that virtual school in the summer, which I think was incredibly successful. I think you guys, the pupil body have been incredible. I think the resilience and flexibility and everything that you guys have shown to kind of roll with the punches over the last few months has been amazing. And, I think the parents have been hugely grateful, governors have been hugely grateful. I think it's been as good a success as it possibly could be. So, and it's been fantastic for me just to be involved in that, and I think it's been a real opportunity in some ways, because sometimes when you come in into a new role, such as a head of a big community, head of a big school like this, people are kind of waiting for you to do something, and actually the circumstances that I came in really gave me an opportunity to build relationships very quickly, and I had to get to know people very quickly. I had to kind of lead that side of what was going to happen to the school over the next few months quite quickly, and that's been useful for me, I suppose, as a new head.
Even though you've been able to establish relationships quickly, though, do you think it's going to be quite difficult for you to make changes at the moment, seeing as we're already battling COVID at the moment, so it's difficult to introduce new...
Yeah, so it is difficult. I'm very conscious of that. So I spend most of my day thinking about hand sanitizer and face masks and things, whereas, in fact, in normal times, classically a new head would come in and, as you say, take a bit of a step back, a bit of a strategic view on how the school is doing and where we maybe want the school to be in the next 3-5 years' time. And it's a much harder at the moment to find the headspace, if you like, to think about that. But I think it's really important that we do, because otherwise we could be thinking about hand sanitizer and face masks for months and months to come. So I think we have to kind of put that aside sometimes, and people are becoming much more used to everything now, aren't they? All the sort of change we had to put in place, and it kind of runs itself now, the new school, if you like, until the next set of government guidance, of course. But no, I think now really is the time that we have to sort of step back, as you say, and begin to think about the future for the school. And actually, what's been really good about the current circumstances is that it has actually offered a load of opportunities for us. So the whole digital stuff that I mentioned, the way in which the school has just embraced the digitalisation of education, if you like, over the past few months. We are now at a place which I think ordinarily would have taken us months, if not years, to get to in normal times. But the issues we've had with COVID have meant that we've had to get there very, very quickly.
It's been a catalyst.
Yeah, enormously. Yeah, and I think and we do need to capitalise on that, and we have done. I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, groups of staff have been meeting and saying, we've made enormous strides in the digital world in the last few months. Let's make the most of that. Let's capitalise on that, and actually try and put in place some longer term changes on the back of it. So I think that's going to be really positive. And I think actually some of the things we've had to put in place about how we've structured the school day, I think actually have been really beneficial. Obviously I haven't seen a normal school day, but everyone tells me, that the way lunch is staggered and break is staggered, and even the staggered beginning and end of the days actually lead to a much calmer, sort of more relaxed way of operating during the school day. By all accounts, having lunch now is a much more pleasurable experience than it was before. So I think when this is all over and we're finally told you can go back to normal, I can't see us going back to exactly how we were, because that would be crazy in some ways. I think there have been a lot of good things. We mentioned assemblies. I mean, that's another one.
Yeah.
The idea of us all cramming in there every Monday morning just doesn't quite work anymore. I think people would find it strange to go back to that. So there's a lot of benefits as well.
Did Mr. Holiday give you any advice? Because obviously QH is quite a unique school with a lot of nuances to it.
Yeah. Not so much advice. I mean, he was fantastic in that I came in the sort of that period between appointed and then arriving. I actually came into the school quite a few times, maybe about 4 times, which I think is quite unusual. And that was really good of him to let me do that, because it's quite tricky when you're a retiring head, especially somebody who's been as long serving as Mr. Holiday. It really feels like your community, your school. It absolutely is. So having your sort of successor kind of tinkering around on the fringes could be quite difficult. But he was fantastically, receptive to that, and I came in a few times, so very quickly got a feel for the place. And that's what you need to get. You need to get that sort of untangible feel for a place. You can't quite put your finger on it, but there's something about QEH, and I've worked in lots of different schools and visited numerous schools, and there is something very special about the school. During that period as well, I came up and was able to, I came to open days, I was able to meet staff, and I was sat in quite a lot of governors' meetings and staff meetings, particularly in those couple of weeks, kind of over the Easter holidays. Lockdown had just started and we were just about to start the summer term, so it was really, really important for us that we started that summer term with a full-on virtual school going. I think that was really important. So to be able to have that handover was really important. It wasn't so much the sort of the handover between Gordon Brown and David Cameron when he just left a note on the desk saying we've spent all the money. So that wasn't the case at all. If anything, actually, what Mr. Holiday's sort of legacy, if you like, is that the school was in such good stead from that perspective and in such a strong position, which can't be said for all independent schools. So, I was very lucky in many respects coming into a school that was in a really good place.
In relation to other independent schools, how do you think QH stands out against them?
Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? Well, from my perspective, I've worked in some incredible schools, and many schools, particularly independent schools, claim to do a lot of the very similar things. You read their sort of aims and objectives, or their values, or their USPs. They'd all be pretty similar in many ways, despite what everyone says. I think there is definitely something special about QH. People talk a lot about the staff and the relationships between staff and the pupils, and I think that does generally set us apart from others. I was absolutely struck, as I said at the beginning, by the warmth and the friendliness and the positivity of the common room, and I think that's so important for a school. And I'm sure you as pupils kind of pick up on that as well. I'm sure you pick up if all the staff hated each other and weren't getting on, and that is completely the opposite here. Everyone gets on so well, and they love coming to work here, and I think that means that they put everything into it. They go above and beyond all the time, and that really is tangible here. And I've worked in other schools where the common rooms, there was a lot more cliques, maybe a bit fractured, maybe some people who weren't that happy working there, and it's just that atmosphere that doesn't always contribute to a good and happy school, and that's what we want really. So that's really important, I think.
Equally though, we are an independent school, and how do you think private schools affect society? What do you think our place is? We're very privileged, but at the same time. Well,
completely. It's a really good question, and one that obviously is asked a lot at the moment. So I think terminology is important here. So I think the term independent school is important. I think the terms that are often used, private school, public school, these sort of terms, I think have negative connotations basically for most of the population. It's the classic newspaper article, isn't it, about any independent school. There's always a picture of boys in their top hat and tails at Eton. And I think it's that misconception that any independent school is Eton, basically. And very, very few independent schools are anything like Eton whatsoever. We are not like... Sorry?
Only one school is like
Yes, exactly. And we are not like Eton whatsoever. Now, we are a more classic independent school, a very old public school, as they used to be called. But actually what you find is that the vast majority of independent schools who sit on the Independent School Council are very small, very specialist schools. So I think it's not helpful at all, particularly that media-driven perspective of independent schools, private schools, privilege, posh, Eton, that sort of thing. But it is definitely out there, and we can't deny it's out there. I'm very keen that people have choice with education. That's really important. I am under no illusions that we are, that the pupils who come here are incredibly privileged to be able to come here. And one thing I really want to do, in one of my sort of key objectives for the next few years, is to look at our accessibility agenda. I think that's absolutely vital. We were established as the city school for, underprivileged, mostly orphan boys who originally came here. And although we can never quite go back to be completely means blind, I really want to work over the next few years to becoming a lot more means blind if we can possibly do that. So, expanding our bursary provision, making us feel. I think one of the key things about this is that it's not just about the finances. Actually, if we want boys and girls from all over the city, all over Bristol, to want to come to QEH, and not just necessarily one certain socio-economic group, primarily from North Bristol, essentially, if we want to expand out into the city and go back to our roots a bit in terms of being the city school, there's actually a lot more cultural and social barriers to get over, actually even more than the financial barriers, because there is bursary funding available. We are very lucky that we do have an endowment, so we can afford to support pupils who otherwise wouldn't be able to come financially. But actually what I think we need to do a lot more is more traditional, what's called outreach work, so going out into certain parts of the city and actually saying to them, look, you know, we aren't the posh, toff school on the hill over there. We are a fantastic school, a wonderful, warm community, and we really want to be as accessible as possible, particularly to young boys joining in Year 7. And we want them to aspire to come here for that, you know, and if they're able to come here, we want to kind of remove as many of the barriers as possible for them coming here. But it's much harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
And my experience, I was at King Edward School in Birmingham before here, and King Edward School in Birmingham has got a long, long history of this. And you know, they worked, when I was there, we worked with 200 primary schools across the city, doing exactly that. So really trying to, you know, it was a boys' school as well, give young boys the aspiration to, you know, access this kind of education, which they can do, and I think that's really important. The other element of that, which I think is vital, is you know, working together as an education sector and trying to avoid this dreadful split we seem to have between the independent schools and the state-maintained schools. And for the last sort of couple of years, I really thought the two sectors were coming together enormously, and there was a lot more partnership work going on, a lot more. So in Bristol, there's a group of independent and state schools who work very closely together, or were working very closely together. Unfortunately, I fear that the last 6 months of COVID has actually made the two paths diverge more, which is a real shame, because seemingly the independent school world seemed to be able to adapt and upskill much more quickly to the challenges they were facing than many of the state sector schools were able to. Not all of them by any means, but many of them for various reasons. And unfortunately, I think from the media perspective and the public's perspective, the gap between independent and state education seems to have got bigger rather than come together, and I think that's something we need to try and address in the next few years. And it's certainly something I really want to get stuck into here when we can.
How do you think you could improve the relationship between the independent sector and the sort of state sector of schools? Then you think that would be more of like maybe sort of social events and sporting events? Or
I think all of that. And I think what I really hate about the way this is approached sometimes is that it's always seen, they have to be seen as being an equal partnership. So partnership's the key word. Yeah. So I use the word outreach, which is now an outdated word, because it implies the posh, tough school going out to the poor state school and going, you know, come and see how we do things much better. You know, which ticks every stereotype box that you don't want to tick at all. So the partnership is absolutely vital, because, you know, I'm under no illusions that in the state sector they do many, many things far better than we do in terms of education. You know, they focus far more on pedagogy, so actually the science of teaching and learning, which, you know, I think generally in independent schools we don't do enough of. I think they do teacher professional development far better than we do, and have far better programs in place to develop teachers. So that's definitely something we can learn from there. You know, there is no doubt that in many state-maintained schools they're hugely under pressure finance-wise, in terms of their budgets have been cut, the number of subjects they can offer have been cut, and it's often, you mentioned arts earlier, it's often actually, unfortunately, creative arts and languages in particular that do get cut first. So I do think there's definitely, you know, they could, you know, many young people in the state sector could definitely benefit from partnership work, particularly in those areas as well. So it's absolutely about working together. I think that's the key thing. And there's various groups, you know, I'm just beginning to learn about it in Bristol, but like I said, in Bristol there is a very active group of independent schools and state schools who are working together. But it's hard, it's a long-term thing, and you know, there's various barriers you need to overcome to get there, but it's definitely something we will do much more of.
Do you think QEH deserves its charitable status? Do you think?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Look, we benefit enormously from it. I think we could do a lot more to justify it at QEH. I think other schools have worked very hard at this. I think we in the past have worked very hard at it. I'm not seeing it that it's rich best at the moment, just because a lot of those activities that we did use to justify our charitable status in the past are not happening at the moment. I think it is, if I'm being frank, quite a difficult thing to justify,
Yeah.
but I think we work very hard at trying to do it, and I think we can obviously do a huge amount more towards that as well. So I mean, I can't, if I'm being frank, I can't see it hanging around forever. But it is very important to us, because the challenge, if we don't have it, would mean, potentially increase in fees to try and offset the amount we lost by losing our charitable status, which actually might then reduce our accessibility even more, and you could say would make us even more privileged and only accessible to a much smaller group of society anyway. So it kind of swings in roundabouts a bit. So it's an interesting point, and so it's something that hasn't come up for a few years from the government, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time before it comes up again.
So obviously the Green Revolution was something that's taken place over the last year.
Yeah.
How do you want QH to sort of carry that on?
Yeah, so now look, this is something that's really important to me. Again, at the moment, of course, it's on that list of must try and do, in the years to come. But it's really important to me. My background's in geography and biology. My education's in that world, and it's always been something that's really important to me. There's a huge amount you can do in schools. I'm very conscious. In schools, we often tinker around the edges with it. We often put recycling bins out, and hopefully people don't put the wrong rubbish in them, and we make sure someone turns off the lights, which is great. But I think actually to make a real difference in schools, it has to become, almost a core part of what the school is about, and we have to go right the way back into not necessarily things that pupils and teachers around the school would necessarily see. So we have to look at where our energy comes from. We have to look at where our waste goes, maybe the sort of less glamorous elements of that, but actually things that actually make a real difference, a real and tangible difference. Recycling paper and all those much more, encouraging people to eat less meat, and all these smaller things are good because they raise awareness more than anything. But I think actually making an environmental difference, an environmental impact, means you have to go back a bit into the operation side of the school, and I think that's really important. It's something we should be doing, and I'd like to look at in the next few years. And I think Bristol's a great place to do it, because as you say, it's such a sort of hot topic in Bristol and so important for many people in the city. So I think we'd have huge support from sort of parents and the communities to do that.
QEH's identity has changed quite a bit over the years. How do you see QEH evolving in the future? Where would you like your headship to finish with the school?
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's interesting talking to old boys about that. Their experiences here when they were here in the 70s and the early 80s. It was very different. It was a pretty tough place. We at the moment talk a lot about our individual care and our pastoral care and how we're a slightly smaller school, so we can, really work with the individuals to get the best out of them, which is all very true. And I think a very attractive. It's very attractive to many parents. I think if you went back to the 70s and early 80s, it was a pretty grim place. All boys, mostly boarding. Conditions were pretty poor. Food was terrible, apparently. Pretty harsh sanctions from masters and things. So, schools change enormously through time. I think I want us to maintain that position as being seen as the school that focuses on the individual. I think I'm repeating myself a bit, but the idea of pastoral care is really important to me, because that's where my background came from. That's the sort of background I came from in terms of education. And I absolutely believe that if you're happy and you love coming to school and you really enjoy it, then all the other bits will fall into place. Your academics will fall into place. Everything else you do around your school life, you will be enthusiastic and you'll love doing it, and you'll give everything you can to it. And I think being happy is the most important thing. And I think that's key for staff as well. If staff love coming to work here, they will enjoy what they do, and they will give of their best and deliver for us as a school. So I'd really like to be known as that place, a warm, friendly, happy school. And then if that happens, we know that our academic results can be right up there with the best in the Southwest, and as has been proved every year over the past few years. So we would never sell ourselves as an academic hothouse or anything like that, and yet our results are some of the best in Bristol, or if not the best in Bristol. Yeah. So I think these two things are connected enormously. So that's really important to me. I think the other bit I talked about before about the accessibility is really important. I would like to see it takes a long time to do this, I'd like to see in 5-7 years' time, quite a steady stream of pupils coming from elsewhere in the city, and a steady stream of pupils who otherwise would not be able to access the school being able to access the school. They would still, they'd still have to sit the same entrance exam, and they'd still be here on absolute, they'd be, their position in school would be absolutely justified and warranted. But I just want to give people that option that I think just don't have it quite at the moment, and that's really important.
How will you plan to help them get here? How will you bridge the gap?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, it's really difficult for a headmaster called Rupert, in what they originally, I'm sure see as, like I said, a posh school on the hill. Who it wouldn't even occur to them to even apply or anything like that. And I think it's about going into these schools and talking to people and then becoming very used. So, say in these primary schools in particular, then become, getting very used to QEH being involved in what they do week to week, month to month. So it becomes they learn more about us. They understand what we're about. Pupils going into the schools regularly, staff members going into the school regularly, them coming here regularly, so they understand that we're not this posh school. Actually, it's a really nice school with a wonderful community. Everyone here is perfectly normal, and you could come here as well and have a wonderful time. So I think it applies everything. It's about meeting and talking and helping people understand people understand more about it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That's our time.